Welcome to Smalltalk Daily for Friday, August 14th, 2009. This morning we'll pick up with settings where we left off, and where we left off is here under Tools, and these are just some general tool settings because we're at the top of the tree here, so you can limit icon length, and it goes from unlimited to various sizes. You can go with text size. There are only 4 choices here: small, medium, large, fixed. There are different ways of changing that. You can go in and screw with individual font definitions in code. I've done a screencast on that. And in the GUI builder, there's a way to define new fonts. I've also gone through that in a screencast. This is about warning things. Use native dialog says Windows only. That's now also available on the Mac. Warn on exit, so that will pop up a dialog box. So for instance, if I check this, every time I try to quit the image, it'll pop up a little dialog asking me if I want to quit. Typically not what I want. This will enable the UI for internationalization. If you're going to ever worry about having message catalogs and various strings in your application that come from outside the image, you want that checked. And this is the debug settings manager errors. You probably want that on. Over here in browser, you get a bunch of things. Auto-categorize methods. You can change that to always or only new methods. You can show all methods when no protocols are selected. That's the default. Show refactoring changes, not the default, and so on. Down here, show the toolbar, show the status bar. The default namespace, if you have an application that you're spending most of your time in, you might want to change that. And mostly you don't want to touch any of these. I tend to leave selector protocol order in alphabetical because traditional is just, I don't know, it's traditional but it's weird. Undo count, you can change that to a bigger number than 5. Database profiles, if you define database connectivity, these will be used by default by things like the ad hoc query tool. In the debugger, this is a bunch of stuff that you mostly don't want to deal with. If you hit edit here, you can go ahead and change some things with the way the context list policy editor works. Not something you want to get into here. Permanent probes by default, that's probably a mistake, but there are times you might want to do that. Show the toolbar below the context list if you want the context list always to be floating to the top. And this is for setting debugging to follow events. If you want to know what all that stuff means, hit help. It will explain this. So here it's going to tell you determines the default type of probes, and down here ensures that events are processed properly while debugging. It will cause other windows to freeze, but if you have multiple threads going that you're trying to debug, probably a good thing to do. So at any point where you're confused over what these settings mean, by all means hit help. Go down to formatter, you see there are a bunch of choices here. Browse auto formats, meaning should the formatter always change when you browse things? That way there's always a uniform look regardless of who wrote the code. Note that that doesn't change the way they're saved, just the way you're looking at them. If on the other hand you hit save auto formats, that means that when you save your method, it'll automatically be formatted into the default way the system is doing it. And here are some options. I've done a whole screencast on this, so I'm going to leave that be right now. The UI Painter, you have the maximum and minimum canvas width and heights. You have the grid, whether it should be on or off when you're doing GUI building. And you have place widgets with the button when they're released or when they're held down. I tend to leave this alone just because it's what I'm used to. And these boxes here, if you check these, you'll have fewer annoying dialog boxes pop up when you're installing GUIs. Typically, I want to do this, this, and this because that makes things a whole lot simpler, so I'll hit apply on that. Down here under warnings, and this is the way things start appearing in the browser. The defaults will have maximum warnings. I tend to leave that on because it'll tell me when I haven't commented anything. Down here in the workspace, you probably want to have your workspace variable silently declared. You probably want the status bar and the toolbar. If you don't, well, you have the option to turn them off. Go down here to store. Again, we have some default options here. So you have fast comparison, just leave that on. The parcel directory, probably best to leave that alone as well. File out package information, just leave that to always, is generally a good idea unless you're specifically interoperating with other packages, other Smalltalks rather, in which case you're probably using file out 3.0. Reconnect action on restart. So generally you'll notice that if you left yourself connected and saved an image, when you start up it'll prompt you. If you don't want that, you can turn that off. Now if you go down here to default package, you can set a default package and you can enable and disable this. So if you set a default package, saved your image, and you want to turn that off, you can always go down here and unset that stuff. File downloading, so this is for files that have been attached to a package or bundle. You can have it automatically go somewhere instead of where it thinks it ought to go. Loading policies. Use the atomic loader, allow binary loading, probably turn these on by default. This way your image will not be left in a weird state when you start it up. And here is for handling bundle overrides so that they are allowed, but things will be marked dirty. Again, you can hit help and get an explanation for what this stuff means. If I go down here to merge policy, again, this is something that you should probably leave alone. Include the branch blessing comment history, the tree size for merging. Unless you're doing some tremendous things, you probably don't need to screw around with that. And down here, you should always probably leave this on to warn before abandoning unpublished merge results. You probably do want that warning. Prerequisites. When loading a prerequisite, always prompt for the version or load the latest version. This can be dangerous depending on what you're doing. I maintain packages that work in both VW 7.6 and 7.7. If I have load latest version, strange things happen, so I typically have it prompt so that I can select. Properties publishing, just leave this one alone. Repositories, this is your definition of repositories. You can edit this here or get access to it through the status bar in the launcher. Table spaces, again, this is probably something to leave alone. This goes all the way back to the beginning of store. Unless you have a DBA that specifically wants you to change this stuff, leave it be. Finally, this one, URI, this is a little confusing. This doesn't mean that you can automatically load parcels via FTP or HTTP. What it means is that if you have a URI that references HTTP or FTP or HTTPS and you don't have that parcel loaded, the system will try to auto-load that for you if you turn this on. So it's a little convenience, but it's just for that specific protocol support. So that's kind of a quick tour through the settings. Again, at any point, if you're not sure what these do, hit help. It will explain what they do, so you can see how that works. So again, if I'm here in prerequisites and I just don't understand the labels here enough, I can go ahead and hit help. In some cases, it gives you more help than others. So maybe you don't get enough explanation like this one here, but in general, it's a good reference to tell you what's going on. So that's about it for today. We've walked through all the settings that are in there, and we'll leave it there for now. Until next time, have fun with Smalltalk.